Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of Rise Urban Nation. It's your host, Terrell Simmons, in the building. I got my good friend, my new brother, Alex, in the building. Alex, how are you doing this morning?
I'm happy to be here, man. Happy to be on with you.
Yeah, me and him was just joking that we both had to get our Starbucks in this morning. So Starbucks, if you listening, can you cut the check, Starbucks? Please cut the check. We out here promoting.
Yes, sir. Do it ahead of time.
Now, hold on. Rejog my memory, Alex. How did we get connected? Because I know we got connected through another good friend of mine, but I'm always making and meeting new friends. So who's our connection?
Irvin. I first actually heard him on your podcast. Irvin Spencer, who's just one of my, that's like big bro, man. I love Irvin, everything about that guy. Great guy. I know he was on your podcast some months back and he had sent it to me, and then me and him were chatting and he was like, you ought to just reach out to Terrell. And I don't know if it was specifically because he thought it would be good for me to be on the podcast or just for some other reason. In our space, we're always, financial services people are always kind of connected and chatting and recommended meeting other people. So it was definitely through Irvin, but we also know a lot of other people.
I know that. I remember us chatting and I was like, man, how we have not run into each other sooner is mind blowing. It's such a small world because we know a lot of people in the same space. Big shout out to Irvin, by the way. His podcast has now entered on my set the second highest rated podcast listened by listeners. And so I'm going to have him back. We're going to have to do some financial literacy classes, get Alex in the mix and see what we can do for the people. Because I have a feeling Alex is about to make a run too for your record. If you listening, Irvin.
Well, I'm going to make sure he listens because I listened to his podcast, the whole way through. I also, last night in preparation, I was going through, the history of podcast history on the podcast app. And I noticed that his was also the longest podcast. So most listened to and longest is good.
Yeah, and usually Joe Rogan's the only one that get away with that, like having really long podcasts and a whole bunch of people listen to it. But I guess we breaking new numbers today.
Yeah, I'd love to hear it.
Yeah. So Alex, let's jump into this thing, man. Like for the people who don't know who you are, could you tell the people who is Alex? And you could take that as far as wide as you want to go.
Ooh, that's a big one. So, I'm Alex. I'm a son. I'm a father now. I got a almost 9-month-old son. I'm a local San Diegan.
Congrats.
Yes, sir. Appreciate that. I'm a local San Diegan. I am married to my amazing wife, Zemed Berhe. And I'm a financial services professional. I mean, that's a big part of one of the hats that I wear, one of the identities that that I'm proud to have kind of represent me. I come from a tight-knit immigrant community, both local and national, and obviously through the whole world. Eritrean. My parents came here from Eritrea. My mom was 6 months pregnant when she came here, so I was almost not even born in America. And I mean, I think as we get some back and forth, I'll be able to sort of paint around that some more. But from a framework perspective, I like to think of myself as the identities that are the loudest for me, which is member of a tribe, leader of a family. I got 3 younger brothers, so all that.
Big shout out to my Eritrean community, Mary, who was on the podcast. Rest in peace, Nipsey Hussle. I've always had a love and affirmation, and your peoples has always showed me love anytime I'm in the spaces. So I appreciate that community as well, and hopefully I could get some affinity of relations into the community to be a part of the community.
Yes, sir. You are a part of the community. No worries. And I think I already told you this, but I think my wife would make a great guest for you all. But shout out to Mary too. Mary is kind of another one of the people in our community who I think is doing a lot of good stuff, both behind the scenes, but really making and on the main stage, but really making inroads. I feel like, and I was joking with somebody actually yesterday, saying like I just love Mary's energy. There's a lot about her that I admire and almost look up to. Even though we're the same age, and so shout out to Mary. Her episode on your podcast was great. It's funny because even people who at an interpersonal level, like Irvin or Mary, or even like I listened to Ron Clark, who I went to high school with. Yes, one of my good friends, and I listened to his episode of your podcast yesterday too. And even the people who you know pretty well, you still learn more about when you kind of let someone, almost spill everything they can on the canvas of what their life and how they see it. So, but yeah, shout out to Mary for sure.
Absolutely. So I know you and my boy Irvin are in the financial industry.
Financial services
is
probably
financial industry.
Yeah,
financial services. Yeah, but you guys do two different things. So, for the people who are listening, explain to me, what part of the financial services industry you're in and what that looks like. And how'd you get into this thing?
So I do home loans. If I'm just gonna, throw it out there with a simple, few words. It's more complicated than just that, I would say. But I do home loans. That's primarily the way that I operate and type of business that I do. Actually, I'm gonna re-answer this question. I already kind of So
okay.
I do home loans, and so I work in the financial services space, specifically providing people financing for buying a home or restructuring financing they already have on a home that they own, typically known as a refinance. And the loan officer is what kind of you'll hear as the most common term for someone in my space. You might hear mortgage consultant, and basically what that looks like is everything from business development, working with folks like Irvin who are financial advisors and have their own clients who might have these needs, and trying to kind of ask for that business and obviously try to take care of his clients, to working with real estate agents who obviously have people who are looking to buy homes that they're servicing, to doing things like this, putting your name out there and marketing yourself, leveraging social media. So this is kind of I call it like the third phase of my career. So the first, my career is specific to being a loan officer, because I've only been a loan officer since really like 2015. And I've been in financial services since 2008. I really stumbled into financial services. I remember I was working at Home Depot while I was in college. I was going to SDSU. And people always ask me like, oh, did you study business? I didn't study anything that had to do with finance or business or economics. I actually studied political science, and I thought I was that I wanted to go to law school, until I realized that I didn't even want to be in school at the time. And I just was like, I'm gonna finish to make my parents happy, and because I've already started. So I was working at Home Depot. I think I got fired because I was late all the time. And a good friend of mine in college, Brittany, she worked at Wells Fargo as a bank teller. And I was I was at the bank. I remember this actually specifically. It was the Grossmont Center. And she was helping me do some type of transaction. And she was like, well, you should work here. I don't even know how it came up. And it's funny because I had actually applied to work at the bank maybe like a year before that. I didn't get even called or whatever. And so I was like, all right, I'll try it again. I tried it again. And then I called the recruiter. She gave me the recruiter's phone number, which, after working for the company for 10 years after that, you're not really supposed to do that. So she gave me the recruiter's number, and I called the recruiter on the first ring. And I was like, yeah, I'm trying to get a job here, and, this, that, and the third. So I got the interview and I got the job, and I sort of just, I wanted a job that had better hours, because mostly I was working retail. I I was working at, like I said, Home Depot. Before that, I worked at Best Buy for a long time when I was in college. And, at that point, I was just happy to have a job. It was really close. I worked the office was like on 63rd and El Cajon. So it was right by SDSU. So I could finish my classes. If I stacked my classes right, I could finish my classes at like 1:30, sprint to the branch and put on a tie and be on a teller line by 2:15. And that was like my little routine. Yeah, for sure. And then when I graduated, they gave me a full-time job. And so that's kind of how I started in financial services. But when I say I'm in my third phase, regarding being a loan officer, I originally started doing home loans working for Wells Fargo. Before that, I had kind of worked my way up over the years and got into management. And then I kind of got over that, eventually managing people and kind of just being, super micromanaged myself. It just seemed like I was kind of limited as far as my professional growth in one regard. And then the other regard, it was just, when you start really understanding what the roles in the bank are and how people get compensated, and then also what their quality of life was, this was the role that was probably the most attractive to me. So, I did that at the bank. That was kind of season one. And then season two was, I did it at a smaller company. So I worked at Bank of America, but I call that season 1, 2, was all kind of the same role. Then season 2 was I had worked at a smaller company that was based out of Arizona, but was trying to make kind of a market in California. And that was actually right when COVID started. I did that for about a year. It was a small company called Goldwater Bank. They made me a manager, which was awesome. So it gave me a little bit of a different experience. And then now I work on what we call the wholesale side. So I work, I work through a broker. So as opposed to, the way I like to explain to people is, as opposed to working at Bank of America or at Wells Fargo selling their products, I'm now set up at an institution that's signed up with, 24 different lenders, right? And then I find the product that makes the most sense for you. So the model is kind of is different. And we'll talk, more about that, I'm sure, as the podcast goes. But that's kind of how I started in financial services, and that's kind of that was kind of my trek to where I'm at today.
I love it. Thanks for taking us through the progression too, and I love like how in the third phase it's now you have a plethora of services, and then with that, like there's so many keys to success and your entrepreneurial journey with trying to market, pivot, resource, connect, just so that you get the right products and services to fulfill the clients that you kind of are trying to support or reach, right? And we'll dive into that in just in a bit. But now, here's what I want to know, because that is a beautiful journey in the story. Did you ever in your wildest dreams think that you'd be doing this? Like when you were younger, did your parents say, oh, here's one career pathway you could go into, financial services, you should do that? Like, did you have a guy that kind of pushed you in that direction, or you have an idea, or was it more so, no, you're gonna go to school and you're gonna do this and then get a
that's
career?
A good question. I would say I was never it's very hard to retroactively look back at what you wanted to do. I could definitely tell you about my parents. I mean, one thing that's very common in our community in general is just the emphasis on education, growing up. And I think some people are fortunate enough, and I do think it's a good thing. I don't think it's a bad thing, but I think some people are fortunate enough where they become tied to a certain, calling or a certain discipline that they want to go after early in life. That definitely was not me. I think, I'm a big believer that your greatest strengths sometimes are your greatest weaknesses. I think I was always, I think like intellectually curious is probably the right word. I think I was always intellectually curious. You know, this, I always think like when I go back and look at my childhood, especially from an academic perspective, and I look at high school or even junior high, the classes in which I was the most engaged were when I was the most engaged by the person who was teaching me whatever I was learning. Right. Yeah. So, you know, in high school, I was on and this wasn't, I don't remember this before high school, but in high school, I went to Mount Miguel High School for 2 years, and I went to Morris High School for 2 years. So actually the other way around, I went to Morris for 2 years. Then I went to Mount Miguel High School, and obviously I took science classes before 11th grade, but like when I got to Mount Miguel, my teachers were so engaging, and they taught the chemistry and physics in such a way that I was really, really engaged. So if you would have asked me like at 18 years old, I would have told you that is sort of what is the most attractive to me, is something in the sciences. And actually, I was a biology major for a little bit. Very, very unknown, little known fact about me. When I was in 12th grade, I was in the Greater San Diego Science and Engineering Fair, and I did a microbiology experiment. I remember, I don't know if they call it an experiment or, I don't know how they label what we did, but I got first place and I got a big scholarship, in that time. I was really sure that I was going to get into the sciences, and I didn't know this at the time, but, going back and looking at it, I was highly engaged because the teachers that I had at the school were so engaging. And so when I got to SDSU, it wasn't the exact same thing. I didn't have that exact same emotional connection. So I never really, I'd be lying to you even if I told you right now, I could pinpoint the moment where I was like, this is it. I definitely think where I'm at right now in my career, and I'm imagining we're going to get into how my business is structured and all that at a certain point. I could definitely say now I know this is for me. And I think the reason I can say that now more than ever is because I've been able to structure what I do on a daily basis to basically match my personality, what's the most engaging for me. So, I like to say that I have found a way to monetize my personality. I have found a way to monetize my interests. And there's a way that, I'm not saying this, everybody can do this, because I do know that there's, there are different basically roadblocks and speed bumps for people depending on where they're at in their career. But for me specifically, I appreciate certain aspects of me being able to stack kind of how I want to go in about doing business development. Because this is not traditional sales, for lack of a better term. If you work on a car lot or something like that, you're really selling one product, and you probably have, a certain core that you got to hit. And oftentimes, unless you're a really savvy salesman, you're just kind of doing the same thing over and over again as you're getting your at bats. And I know, car salesmen or used car salesmen get a bad rep. But whatever it is that you might be selling, versus when you're doing something on this end, because of the amount of compensation that you get for every deal that you bring in, you don't have this kind of speed through, you don't need to like run through 100 transactions a day like someone who might own a retail store. So you can be methodical on how you decide to go about getting your business. But to go back really quickly to what you had asked in the beginning, as far as my parents go, I would say maybe even less than most of our parents in the community at large. My parents always talked about school, but they were never, because a lot of my friends and a lot of, it's kind of like almost at this point, the cliches, everybody will say, oh, the Eritrean parents say you got to be a doctor, a lawyer, engineer. I never really got that from my parents. I will say they always emphasize you got to go to school. And I think it just has to do with, kind of where they're from and what they saw as, reputable professions. In America, I don't know what the percentage is. I think it's somewhere between 15 to 20% of, the economy is financial services, right? So it's not like that in every country in the world. And so, bankers and real estate people and CPAs and things like that. Like those insurance folks, those people do really well in America, especially the higher end of the income distribution amongst those job families. They do really well for themselves. So, no, I definitely don't think that, if you ask my mom right now, she would probably tell you she wants me to go back to school, just because they just associate school with success. And so, that's what I would definitely say, as far as, my parents go. But,
I love that. I love that. So, I always like to tell the youth when I speak to them, sometimes people think your career is like always the stepping stone, next step, and you're walking up those steps until you reach that perfect destination. But I often tell them sometimes people's career, as you might have thought, that was their trajectory of success by where you look at them where they're at now. But sometimes it's like this. It's like you go down this maze, you come back one end, you're like, oh shoot, I gotta go back down this way because that's not the path for me. And so I always tell them, look, to start wherever you're at, right? Because we used to do these summer job programs, and they was like, well, I really want to get here. I was like, yeah, I know this first job is not probably, it's not where you want to get to, but take this and use this as a learning example so that you can learn, one, the things you don't want to do, right? And then there's some functionality in that job that you can also learn that will, present itself as a skill later on that you can use in your forever career, right? Everybody has to start somewhere. When you look at your first job, what was your first job? Because I'm curious to know. And what's one skill you think you probably learned from your first job?
Oh, you're gonna laugh at this. So my first job was it was a summer job. I think it was summer 2002. It had to have been summer 2002. I don't think it was, or it might have been summer 2001, to be honest with you. But I was like 14 or 15, and I don't know how it's set up now, but in order to work, you used to have to get what they call like a working permit. Like you used to have to get a permit to work if you were under 18, I believe. And I think you typically got that from the career center at whatever school you went to. I don't know if that was a way to make sure people were in school or what. I don't even know the mechanics of that back then. But nobody would hire you if you were under 16, because all my friends who were 16, they can go get a job at Taco Bell or whatever. And back then, I think minimum wage was like $6.75, something. That was good money for a high school student. But I found a job that will hire me, and I think I was 14 at the time. I found a job that will hire me under 16. So I worked at Cabrillo National Monument, which is like a site down at the very bottom of Point Loma. So if you look at the map of San Diego, Point Loma ends at a point, and there's a national monument there, and it's a park basically. And so they just had us doing manual labor, like cleaning, stuff off the side of the hills, picking up trash. I mean, the only thing I'll tell you I learned from that job was that I did not want to do manual labor for a living. Yeah, man, it was pretty awful. Looking back, it's actually kind of predatory, man. They had like these kids that was busting us in. They didn't bust us in, but whatever. We were bussed in, from Morris. We went to Gompers. It was definitely, a bunch of kids who needed to get some money or wanted to get some money. And so I only did it for a summer. I mean, my real first job was I worked at McDonald's in Rancho San Diego for a while, from when I was like maybe 16 until I finished, on and off until I finished high school. I will say that job I did, even if they're sort of lessons that I would have learned elsewhere anyway, I did learn some stuff from that job. So, say it again. I did learn some stuff from. I mean, one of the things that like always stuck with me, and I think was that like when I went to drive-through, they didn't trust me to touch the food. They didn't trust me with any of that stuff. So all I could do was make drinks and hand them to people at the window. But like I learned like little things. When it's down, you gotta restock your little station. You gotta go re-up on your barbecue sauces and napkins and straws and just things like that. And I mean, to this day, I'm kind of like that in a way where I like to do things kind of efficiently and kind of run through all right, here's my checklist of X, Y, and Z. And then after that, I really only mostly worked retail. But yeah, my first job, yeah, that was terrible. Yeah, that was awful.
Well, I love how you gave that analogy. Like, that's one thing you learned. Like when you had that downtime, you re-up on these different things. So when there's downtime because you're in the third phase of your business, when there's a downtime, what do you re-up on in your business?
That is actually a great question, and in some ways very well timed for what's going on in our industry specifically right now. So, for those who don't know, basically, because of COVID and the beginning of COVID, all the way through, let's call it, the end of 2021, my industry, mortgage professionals had, some of the greatest, literally the greatest production of business in the history of the industry, specifically because interest rates were at all-time lows, at record lows.
And let me say, I am a fan of that. I was one of y'all customers. I had to do the refi so I could get that 2 point whatever percent that I would never probably ever see again on my home
definitely
loan.
Good for you. So that was that. It was an amazing run for the industry. I will say, on a personal note, I had a lot of things happening last year, and kind of in the middle of that run, I had like I told you, I have a newborn, and I lost my father last year, and so I was in and out from a business perspective, and no regrets. Obviously, I was taking care of what needed to be taken care of at home, but there's been a change in our industry that started, maybe about 3 months ago or so, where we swung incredibly hard in the other direction, where now we're dealing with an interest rate environment that is, literally the highest has been since I've been in the industry for sure, but definitely the highest since it's been since pre 2008. So since before the mortgage crash. And that obviously has, there's two types of business that we do primarily. We do purchase business, where you're helping somebody secure financing to buy property. And we do refinance business, where you're helping somebody restructure a loan that they already have. Now, the vast majority of people who do refinances do it to lower their rate, right? So a lot of folks took advantage of that already because, again, I like to joke and say any loan officer who was working during that run, they had it easy because all they had to do was literally talk to anybody who owned a home, and they could almost guarantee them a lower rate, right? Which is is a great situation to be in if you're in that industry. And so now we kind of have the opposite going on, where all that business is dried up. And then throughout the entire time of COVID, even when rates were super low, it's been hard for people to find and get their offers accepted when they're buying a home. So we actually kind of got punched in both directions at the same time, right? So we were already having a hard time getting offers accepted, even if you had clients, right? And then on the other end, you lose all of this other refinance business. So right now, there's a lot of, it's a tumultuous time if you're a loan officer. And so what I'm doing right now is I am basically trying to double down on my business. And so instead of and obviously I'm not saying that people who do what I do aren't, going hard and trying to earn a living and go and find the right clients and service them. But what I'm doing is, I am just committed to where I'm at. So even though business is slowed up, we just hired a full-time assistant, and she's going to be amazing for our business. I am, I have a marketing consultant. I'm actually, when we wrap up today, I'm going to be recording some video with a videographer. So I'm paying for a lot more services. I'm paying for a lot more consultation because I don't work for a big company anymore. Marketing, I got to do marketing. I got to own advertisement, for lack of a better term. I got to own business development. I got to own coaching. So, I'm paying for coaching. And then even like some things that aren't like directly tied to my industry, but are tied to me. I just signed up for some personal training, and I'm trying to get, kind of locked in and to feel good and be more present physically. And so I'm just investing in the business right now because I feel like times like this, I think, are opportunities for those of us who are prepared for them. I'm pretty confident that I have a lane that I've already sort of carved out. And now what I want to do is I want to just kind of dig it even further and really kind of cement myself in what I'm trying to do here. I'm on this big kick right now where I'm really trying to differentiate my sales, my marketing, and my business development plans. And all of that, that's all growth, right? All three of those categories. Sales is following up with the opportunities that you already have. Marketing is getting out in front of an audience, whether it's social media, whether it's through email, whether it's, sponsoring events. And then business development is having relationships like the one I have with Irvin, where you are serving their clients when they give you opportunities and making sure that you're adding as much value and educating your partners on the things that you can do. And so right now, I would say the metaphor to that kid who was stocking the napkins and the straws is right now it's a little slow. So I'm just lining up all my plans, and now it's just time to execute. And I don't anticipate that we'll be in an environment like this forever, but there is a lot of shifting happening across all industries based on what was happening even before COVID, which is this tech revolution that we're kind of in. And then also because of COVID, which is disrupting economies, even the war in Ukraine and how that impacts basically a lot of these countries' appetites to do business with one another, which has downstream impacts for anybody who's in financial services. So, right now I'm gonna plant my feet and I'm gonna go for it.
Yeah, and I love that. And I think anytime you have downtime, whether it be recession or transition, it's always good to double down and stock up on, anything that can help you level up personally, whether it be education, coaching, everything you mentioned. So I love that you gave that to the listeners because it's practical advice for any industry that you're in, any lane that you operate in. And that's a valuable lesson that you just taught to the people that they could take with them anywhere when they're building and trying to scale. Now, I want to dial it back to just a little bit, just for our listeners who you probably going to inspire a lot of people who are looking at this time and say, you know what, he's right. I'm in this dead end to figure out what I want to be. And I hear this high school student about to graduate, college student in college, trying to. So you inspire me, and I said, you know what? I'm gonna start my journey into job. I don't like it. I've always thought about doing something like what Alex is doing. I'm gonna go ahead and invest in getting educated about that, or maybe I might be a new high school student or college student that financial service industry is doing something like Alex is doing because I like it. Or it sounds like it could be my way in or my thing that I can do. What's some advice that you would give to someone who would like to start a career in your industry, and specifically, to those things that I alluded to? I'm either in this dead end job and I'm trying to switch, or I'm this new college student trying to find my way.
That's a good question. Let me try to be as thoughtful as possible in my answer. There's a lot of different models in financial services. I would say the first advice that I could have. So one thing about me, Terrell, is I'm notoriously careful with my words sometimes, especially when I feel like somebody take what I say and not necessarily misuse it, but almost like, make action based on what I say. I try to be really mindful of how I explain things.
Yeah. And let's break it down even more specifically in your
I'm comfortable answering the question. So and even at large, I think it actually might be more beneficial. This will apply for any types of financial services in general. So First,
Gotcha.
and I think
Okay.
this is really important, is you have to consider the fact that the primary thing about a job, in my opinion, right, and I'm not saying this has to be for everybody else, the primary function a job has is it has a utility, which is it helps you provide income for yourself, if you have a family, for your family. So understanding all the models that are out there is really important, right? So you could be a financial advisor that does one thing, and you could be a financial advisor that does something completely different. You could be a loan officer that you typically do the same thing if you're a loan officer, but you could be in one model where you work at a credit union and you're more kind of taking the clients that walk in and you're putting them through this sort of process or assembly line that's very different than me, where not to sound corny, but there's a lot of art to what I do, right? There's a lot of like, how am I going to kind of go down this route or that route? So the first thing I would tell anybody is to understand the model. How are you compensated, and then kind of work your way backwards to like, what would that look like as far as what kind of development I'm going to need. The good thing about most financial services jobs is I don't want to say this unequivocally, but I'm pretty sure there isn't any financial services job that requires a degree. So you don't need to have a degree to do anything in financial, which is a very big misconception. And I just know that because people talk to me and ask me like, oh, what did you have to study to do your job? Most roles in which you're making some type of commission, a bonus, or a decent income, you do have some kind of license. So I would also encourage them to study like what that process looks like. What does getting licensed look like? Will the company sponsor me for the license? Do I have to pay for my own license? And then the third thing I would do is I would find somebody who's already doing that job. Actually, I would find more than one person who's already doing that job, and probably more than one institution. Maybe folks who are, kind of like me, who are contract employees, and someone who's a W-2 employee like me 2 years ago, someone who might work for a local smaller company, if it's in a bank, maybe they're working for a credit union versus someone who works for a national company. I mean, you want to give yourself as much real world experience and more than one, because you don't just want one person's opinion. You want to be able to kind of calibrate. If you can get to the next level, which is also observe the person at their job in some capacity, that's even better, because you can see what it actually looks like. I think that we are in an interesting time where people, and I'm not bagging on Google or YouTube, but people can think they understand something because they Googled or YouTubed it to death. Because they Googled or YouTubed it to death. And, there's just, even me right now, I'm a different person presenting myself than I might have been the 6 hours or 8 hours that I worked yesterday if you sat next to me. And I'm not saying that because, I'm being manipulative or conniving right now. It's just, I'm telling a story, right? And the story is my assessment of what it was like versus if you observed it as like an objective party watching me and how I treat clients or what my business plan is and how frustrating certain aspects of what we do might be. And also typically when you're on YouTube or Google, you're seeing winners, right? Like, I hate to say it that way, but like it's a lot of people. I mean, what I do is not easy. I like to think that I go about my business in ways that try to make it easier for myself. I am unapologetically ready to take advantage of any advantages that I have, right? Like I lean heavily on my community. That's probably where I get about a third of my business. I lean heavily on the relationships that I have with people who I've worked with over the years in financial services, people who worked with me at the banks and the other companies who are now in other companies, and we do business development together. But when you're always kind of going to YouTube, and I mean, the guy who's making YouTube videos as a loan officer or real estate agent, not always, but most of the time, they're probably a hot shot, and they might not represent sort of what you might be a hot shot eventually too, but it might not represent what your journey is going to look like to get there. And so, I say this to say, I love financial services. I don't think it's as number intensive as people might think. Like I'm not in finance. This is one thing that I think people get really confused about. So for every company nonprofit, whatever, even the government, they have finance. That just means people who handle numbers, right? That could be on an analytical side or that could be on the financial side. So, but financial services, I'm more comparable to the person, I'm more comparable to the person who serves you at, you know, in any service role, right, than I am really to somebody who's in finance. So I'm not really crunching numbers all day long. It's not that. It's people. It's talking to folks. It's telling your story. It's talking about the services you provide. It's asking for the business. So yeah,
Building
100%.
relationships,
Building
all that good stuff.
relationships, growing relationships you already have. So I would say if you're interested in talking, and it's definitely not a mute job, right? You're gonna have to communicate. If you are, if you like kind of putting puzzles together and kind of seeing how you're gonna go about it, then yeah. And you might also have to do jobs that, you know, on your way up, you might also have to do jobs that are not, you know, exactly this job yet. You might need to go be a loan officer assistant where you are aiding someone in that job, or you might need to go be, you know, what they call analysts for a lot of companies, you know, and kind of doing some of the entry level work and then working your way up. But I mean, and like I said earlier, man, I don't know what the exact numbers are, but I think it's 15. I think the only industry that's for sure bigger than financial services is healthcare. But it's like 15% of the economy, and I'm not sure if that means personnel or revenue, but that's a big number, right? So this is a great industry to be in, and you know, if you like people, if you're ambitious, and you want to have an entrepreneurial type of job on a daily basis, this is definitely it for people.
Yeah, and what I also would say to that is that I think the industry is going to even grow because you have the fintech industry, which is something that I've been immersed in these last couple of years, dealing with startup companies and technology and so forth. And I think that's just going to expand the market as well. With that, what do you? I also wonder, like, just from your perspective, what do you think the future has in store for your industry? When you look at it, and especially, what do you think it looks like for folks that look like me and you?
Man, your questions are on point, man. I think about this a lot, actually. As far as financial services at large, I think they're being disrupted by technology like everything else is. So there's the long term and probably more than likely inevitable impacts that are happening right now, which is technology. And then there are more short term, ideally, right? Hopefully short term impacts. And those are primarily COVID and the war in Eastern Europe and Ukraine. And the reason why those two things are important isn't necessarily because, I mean, they're not necessarily directly related to what I do, but they are directly related to how, you know, governments and large institutions that have a lot of control over how a lot of the instruments that determine prices and how, you know, how much money costs to borrow, and all those things are impacted by things like COVID and war, specifically this war that's, you know, going to long term more than likely disrupt what has been a natural order of sorts for a lot of the largest economies in the world. As far as technology goes, that's the one that, you know, it's the one that definitely it's a tricky one. I think, like most other industries, for those folks who are either in entry level roles or you know, have basically simpler job functions, for lack of a better term, we've already seen, you know, large amounts of those job families kind of go away. I mean, this is very anecdotal, but I'm sure it's true amongst a lot of institutions. You know, when I was 21, 22 years old, you know, 12, 13 years ago, and I was working as a bank teller, there was like 15 of us on that teller line. If you were that same office right now, you might get help by 2, right? So those jobs went somewhere. All of us have noticed how much more powerful, you know, the online banking space is. if you go and you use some of these, websites like the I think it's called NerdWallet, or some of these websites that now aggregate an audience, and then you buy the products directly through the Credit Karma or whatever. You buy the product. Those were someone's job before, right? Like American Express or whoever was selling those products, whether it's they had somebody at a call center or whatever. Now they're able to advertise through these different channels. Bankrate.com. They have these companies are aggregating some, and so the bigger companies. Because I worked at Bank of America for 3 years. I worked at Wells Fargo for almost 10 years. I worked at U.S. Bank for about a year, and I watched it in all these companies as well. Not only how the personnel might change because literally the job functions aren't as necessary as people are hopping into mobile, but then the other end of it, which is how they're actually in some ways enhancing the customer's experience by giving them all of these ways to facilitate what have normally been a question that you ask somebody inside of an office online. And so, that is something that I think about a lot. And, if you look at, I look at these numbers, all the time, but if you look at like year over year, the companies that how much market share they have in the home loan space, it went, I mean, like in 6 years since I've been doing this, 7 years, it went from Wells Fargo, B of A, Chase being those who are originating the most loans, basically legacy financial services companies, to Rocket Mortgage, United Wholesale Mortgage, because, when you're watching football, you're watching the NBA playoffs, who's advertising to you? And they're able to use technology. They're able to use advertising and marketing to get a population to come to them, and people are comfortable doing that. And so for someone like me, or someone like, Irvin, for example, we basically eat what we kill, right? I mean, there's no real rosy way to say it. I'm going to be able to make a living based on how much production I can make. And because a lot of my production is based on the relationships that I already have, on the clients that I've served in the past, based on people, me being able to make a good impression and people knowing what I do for a living, I think definitely in the short term, it's hard to automate me away, right? Because I still make those companies money because I bring clients to them. But for the company, the more retail model, so this, and this wasn't like, I didn't have foresight coming here, right? I'm just watching this as I'm here now. But for the more retail model, for the Wells Fargo loan officer that I was, or the Bank of America loan officer that I was, in the short term, it's more writing on the wall than anything else. But I can only imagine what I would be thinking is, well, hell, you're Bank of America. You're a Fortune 25, Fortune 50 company. You have 50 million clients. Right now, I'm facilitating a service by getting the clients to get the application and putting through the system. If you're for lack of a better term, responsible CEO working on that bottom line, it's almost your incentives are almost to get rid of me if you can, right? Because I'm an expense. And so, what that looks like long term, I can't really tell you. In the short term, I'm really happy with the space that I'm in because I have so much more autonomy to be able to, like, when I was at the big banks, man, I literally could not do this. Like, it would not be allowed. It's not against the law, but it's against their internal policies because of, their quality control model. And so I'm really happy that I'm in the space that I'm in. It takes a little bit of risk because I don't work for a big company. I don't have all the exact same insurances and retirement benefits and all that stuff, but my upside is for sure higher. And as far as the short to long term, this model is not going away because I'm ultimately bringing back value to those 23 or 24 lenders that we work with because I'm bringing in the clients. There is no overhead for them, right? I bring in the client. They don't pay for my advertisement. They don't pay me for retirement. There's no chance of me suing them as an employee because I was, I feel like I was treated wrong by the company. It's just they make their margin and they pay us a check. And and that's happening outside of financial services too, if I'm being honest, right? A lot of people are going to that gig economy. So yeah, man, it's a world.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you say that. Yeah, I'm glad that you say that, because I often tell people, like, yeah, we won't have the technology. Yeah, it's going to make it easier and allow for more competition. But I don't think the human side of it is going to dissipate just because of you. There's something that you just cannot replace when you get service. Like, it's still customer service at the end of the day, and a technology piece can't service me the way that I need, as far as to feel heard, listened to, trusted, and interacted with, that somebody like yourself or whoever else comes in this game just can't replace. So I'm glad that you said that, and I'm looking forward to see what the future holds. It's going to be definitely interesting to see. I like to keep these podcasts. I feel like me and you can go forever and talk, but I want to keep it like a drive time. So let's end off with 2 questions. Like, let me see. My first question to you is, because I'm just curious, because me and you always have so much deep conversation. What is one good lesson life has taught you?
The power of relationships. I would say that, and maybe because I'm able to rely on relationships at the interpersonal level, but even also at the professional level. I think that the power of relationships is, I think that's what human beings live for, not to get philosophical or anything like that, but I think relationships are, and there's so many different ways to cut it, but relationships are ultimately what make life worth it, right? And even some of the things that, I might do that are, either vain or, surface level or whatever, it's because I value what other people think and how other people feel about me and how I make other people think and feel. And so, ultimately, human beings are relational creatures. I find myself fortunate to be able to, to use the relationships that I have. And use almost sounds like a dirty word, but I really mean it that way, right? It's, you're part two in a relationship. It's both ways, but use the relationships I have to make a living, to use the professional relationships that I have and have friendship come out of it and fellowship come out of that too. And so, yeah, I truly believe this, man. I know it's hard to sometimes look at your phone or the headlines, but at a micro level, man, people are amazing. Almost everyone, if you really give them, I have a son right now, so everything I see right now is in. I'm looking at a picture of my son. Everything that I see right now is and I always think about, the type of care that I try to give to my son when he's in need or something like that. And I just think, like, if I could try my best to see, at my best, obviously, if I could try my best to see every human being that I interact with as someone who's in need, and knowing that I'm in need, right? If I could always try to have that lens, because, there is an innocence, if you're not cynical, there is an innocence about everybody. And so, yeah, taking care of people, having people take care of you, man, that's what life is about,
Yeah, I fully second that. The power of connection is something that's just innately in us as humans, and so I think you have the just an amazing personality and insight to know that connection is important and build those human connections. And I don't think, when you said use, I think don't look at that as a negative context. We all have utility when it comes to how we view our relationships, and because if everybody's giving something to that relationship to make it grow, foster, I think the a great word is that you foster great relationships and build them up to be like a win-win, and always care for, there's reciprocation that's always going back and forth through the relationships you have fostered and developed throughout the years, even when we've met from the first time we've met. So I appreciate you for that. And that's what I truly love about you, and I hope that I can continue to emulate that you have shown and you have grown with all of the people that you come intertwined with from me to Irvin and whoever reaches this podcast, right?
Appreciate that.
So let's end off like this, brother. Anytime. What projects are you currently working on, and where can people find you?
So actually, I should be disappointed in myself that I didn't say this to begin with. So the company is Stronger Lending. I should have said that in the beginning. So the company is Stronger Lending. You can go to strongerlending.com, or you can email me if you'd like it, Alex at Stronger Lending. I'm on all the social media stuff. So you can find me at Alex Zere, Alex, last name Zere. I'm sure it'll be in the podcast. That's my name on Facebook, on LinkedIn. And then on Instagram, you can find us at Stronger Lending, or my personal page at AZ San Diego. I would say this is the project right now. I had a real good call with a coach of mine a couple of days ago, where we really are just trying to hone in on this. We talked a little bit about some of the tumult in the industry right now, and some of the and I think the best thing for me to focus on, besides my personal objectives in my life from a professional perspective, is kind of those three big pillars right now. That's going to be the season for, I think, the rest of 2022 is, what am I doing from a business perspective when it comes to sales, when it comes to marketing, and when it comes to business development. And so, you'll definitely find me on social media. I'm able to service clients in right now, California, Texas, Florida, and Arizona. So the company's licensed in all those places. I would love to take care of you if you have a need. And if you're interested in anything that has to do with financial services at large, feel free to reach out to me. I know a lot of folks who would be more than willing to help. I think I didn't answer this part of your question, but I can probably wrap it into here as we finish too, is that I think for, people of color, Black people specifically, Black men, whoever it is, the power in financial services, especially if you're on the advice side, is that you get to go out and build your own business model, because ultimately the companies that are paying us, they want us to drive revenue. They want us to generate business. And so I would almost say, this almost sounds weird to say this way, but I would almost say that we should be disproportionately encouraged to enter financial services, right? Because we are disproportionately underrepresented, right? And so when you're just doing kind of the math, right, that means there's, a higher potential for us to have a good conversion ratio, for lack of a better term, with our own folks. And you'll be able to connect with the community at a higher level. You'll be able to take care of your community at a higher level. So yeah, man, Instagram, AZ San Diego, Alex Zere, everywhere else, strongerlending.com. And I look forward to that. And I really appreciate this. I appreciate what you do. Yeah,
thank you so much for that. I love that insight. Like, yeah, we're so underrepresented in that, for not just anything
sure.
in wealth building, financial services, home buying, all of it, right? So I think heed the words that Alex just said. Those are gems. If you are looking at legacy, wealth, and when I say wealth, I don't mean just financially. I'm thinking about a wholeness aspect, financial health, physical health, mental health. Look at everything that encompasses, and at the end of the day, it takes finances to really build that for yourself and your family. So you should enter into these educational circles, and if you can, if it's a passion, enter into it with a mindset to get into that industry, build your own business so that you can build your community, help your family, and build health and wellness, legacy, whatever it is that you thrive to do. So Alex, my man, thank you so much for stopping on, being on part of this podcast. I can't wait for this episode to air. If you were driving, don't worry, I'm gonna get all Alex's information. I'm gonna put it in the show notes so that you can connect with this brother. And I hope that we get to do something again. Alex, thank you for blessing us, brother. I appreciate you so much. And until the next time, you take care of yourself and those around you.
Yes, sir. Appreciate this for having me on.